Welcome to the 3DownNation podcast. I'm Justin Dunk, joined by John Hodge and JC Abbott. Hodge, training camp is officially upon us. I can say it now. Factually correct. You happy?
It is, and it's exciting. We all love camps. I know I've been out to Bombers camp a couple of times. JC's been all the way out. Where is it? Is it Kelowna that the BC Lions are in?
Kamloops.
Kamloops. Okay, I always mix those two up. How far exactly is Kamloops from Vancouver? I know it's like it's a fair trip.
It is a fair trip. It's about a 3-hour drive. I don't drive, so I took the bus out. It was a 4-hour bus ride each way for me to get out to Kamloops. But yeah, it was good to. It's a beautiful setting. Good to get eyes on the guys. You're sort of nestled on the top of the hill, the mountains and the river in the background. Really spectacular setting for football, and lots of excitement, of course, in the local community with the Lions there.
JC out here taking the bus 4 hours one way, 8 hours total in a day just to get the BC Lions goods. We should shout out some of our contributors as well. Ryan Ballantyne was in person at the Stampeders Riders preseason kickoff game, I guess we'll call it. Andrew Hoskins has been at a bunch of Edmonton Elks practices through training camp. Hodge, you said you've been out with the Bombers. Our guy Pablo Herrera Vargara was out in Quebec City. Had a great story on Arnaud Desjardins. We'll get into that Canadian quarterback discussion, of course, but just wanted to shout out the fellas. And then also Griff Bourdignon, I think is how you say his last name properly. He was at the Double Blue scrimmage for the Toronto Argonauts at the University of Guelph Stadium. So we got you covered coast to coast, everybody. Let's get it going, boys. Today we're discussing the CFL officially ratifying rule changes for the 2026 season.
The Lions reworking their BC Place Stadium lease.
The timeline possibly being too short to make cuts at CFL training camps.
Micah Awe firing shots at his old team.
And TSN's CFL preseason broadcast schedule. But first,
the Saskatchewan Roughriders and Calgary Stampeders played the first preseason game of the 2026 season on Monday, with the home side coming out on top 20-15 at McMahon Stadium. What stood out most to you?
The Aloha kid, Brayden Schager, looked absolutely awesome. Man, he brought that Aloha spirit to the mainland, I think is how they refer to it as, I should say. He's not only brought it from Hawaii to the mainland, he's brought it from Hawaii all the way to Saskatchewan via Calgary in this football game. I thought Schager looked so comfortable. And let's not forget, fellas, that was his first real CFL action. He joined the team late last year and got a chance to understand Mark Mueller's playbook. And clearly he's put in the work, because I don't care who was against on that field. Okay, people are just talking about he was in there in the fourth quarter, got in, at the end of the third, and was playing scrubs, as some people termed it. But you play who you play, and you play well against who you play, and that earns you your next opportunity, or puts you more in the discussion, perhaps in this case, to be in that backup quarterback competition legitimately. Schager looked, I thought, really good. Threw two great seam balls to Matthew Sexton, who had only been with the Riders for a week and then is all of a sudden suiting up with them and leading the team in receiving. So he was another standout. But Schager looked really good, comfortable in the pocket, delivering strikes down the middle of the field, which can be difficult for some of these quarterbacks who have grown up in the American game to understand the nuances with that, especially with the extra defender. And then moving outside the pocket, like how about that touchdown run? He's directing traffic, gets the edge, and then takes it in. I think it was from 20 yards out. So Schager stood out to me, and I couldn't help but think, fellas, also in the back of my mind, was next year, that is going to be the first weekend of not the preseason, the regular season. So fortunately, that day in Calgary seemed like the weather was at least okay. I know there was some rain at McMahon Stadium, but overall it seemed decent. I know it was really good in southern Ontario in terms of the temperature at least, but it's going to be an early start in 27, boys.
Yeah, the weather on the prairies has not felt very spring-like. We had a few days about a month ago that were summer-like, and it's going to be summer-like later this week. It's going to hit 30 degrees in a few days in Winnipeg. I don't know why, but we seem in Manitoba to be allergic to temperatures between 10 and 30, which is unfortunate because those are the best temperatures by far. Otherwise, we're always too cold or too hot. So we'll have to wait and see what the weather holds in 2027, the first year of this change of moving up the regular season schedule. But to me, I think your point's well taken, Dunk. You're putting Schager in the Hall of Fame right now. I think that's maybe a little beyond of what I would do, but he played well. To me, the biggest standout for this game was I thought the tale of two quarterback rooms, right? The Calgary Stampeders, the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I'd throw BC into the mix, but to me, these are the two teams that going into 2026 had the biggest question marks behind, not with their starters, but behind their starters, right? Depth was a big question. There's a reason why Jake Maier was in Saskatchewan last year to kind of steady that backup job. And there was a reason why PJ Walker was brought in last year with the Calgary Stampeders to steady that backup job. Well, both of those players have moved on, Maier to Ottawa, and of course, Walker to retirement. And so I was watching these QBs like a hawk, going, okay, these are two good football teams, playoff football teams. Obviously, one's a reigning Grey Cup champ. Another was spectacular the first half of 2025, average the second half, but almost upset the BC Lions in that West semifinal. And I thought Saskatchewan's quarterbacks, if you're the Riders coming out of that game, you're feeling pretty good. I think Schager, the praise I think is valid. Schager, my apologies. Schager, I thought that was valid. I also thought Jack Cohn looked solid. He wasn't spectacular. He had the ugly pick where he was kind of off balance. It looked like he might have, like the ball might have been affected by the hit. It's kind of hard to tell from the one broadcast angle we got, but he overshot the little outlet pass to the running back and it landed. You can't float a ball in the middle of the field. Marquel Lee picking that ball off and bringing it back a little bit for the Stampeders. But other than that, I thought he actually looked a decent amount like Trevor Harris when he was at his best. Like he's a big, lean passer back there, making super quick decisions with the football. He's not a dual threat guy. I see Justin shaking his head. I'll let you have your rebuttal in a moment. But when you get the ball out super quickly, accurately, and again, not a dual threat guy, but athletic enough to make plays, those are all parts of Trevor Harris's game and what has made him successful over 15 years in the Canadian Football League. On the flip side, if I'm the Calgary Stampeders, I'm going, whoa, okay, Josh Love, I liked what he did with his feet. He had a couple nice runs. I liked that he was diving like a maniac head first. Obviously, he's fearless, but arm talent-wise, he is obviously limited. And the other issue here is he is 29. Like, this is not Schager, who's 22 and just coming out of school, and it's like, whoa.
23.
This guy, I thought he was 22. I'll have to double check. JC, double check.
I will fact check.
Thank you. Please fact check. I looked this up yesterday, but I could be wrong. Anyway, the quarterback situation for the Calgary Stampeders. You've got Josh Love, who's probably at or close to his ceiling. He's a 6-year pro. Like, again, he's not a rookie. He's not a young man. He is middle-aged. He's in the middle of his pro football career. What you see is probably what you're going to get. I didn't particularly like his game. And then I thought, Ben Wooldridge, some interesting stuff. Big bodied, athletic. Jacoby Criswell, who was a former starter at UNC, played at East Tennessee this past year. Again, big body, athletic. I thought had probably the best arm of anybody. But Mark Steven, who was providing the play-by-play commentary and is at the Stampeders camp all the time, said on the broadcast that Criswell is having trouble getting the offense down. And when the rights holder is talking about you struggling with the offense, that to me is a big red flag. So I can't provide a personal opinion on that. I'm not at Stampeders training camp, and we can't give Dave Dickinson truth serum and say exactly how much is Jacoby Criswell struggling with the offense here. But to me, that was the defining part of this game, is two quarterback rooms, one of which had questions and I thought answered a lot of them. Another of which had a lot of questions and maybe did not answer all of them.
That stuck out like a sore thumb to me as well. I did not think that Josh Love played particularly well. And at this stage of his career, having experience in the CFL, that's the guy that you expect to take the next step. And I don't know that he showed that in this first preseason game. That's concerning if you're the Calgary Stampeders. On the flip side, I agree with you, Hodge. I thought Jack Cohn looked all right in that game. He didn't light the world on fire, but This was a guy I thought showed some toughness, some drive with some of his runs. I thought he played reasonably well. I take a little bit off of that interception because I do believe it was affected by the hit. And Brayden Schager looked great in his action late in the game. For the record, he is 23. He'll turn
My bad.
24 in August. So he is on the tail end of 23, not
There are conflicting
22.
reports, though. The CFL has him at 23,
Yeah.
but other places have him at 22. So, I mean, if we're going to take somebody's word for it, are we really taking the CFL's?
Well,
That's true.
it should also be noted, I think it was last year, we reported that Mario Alford, was in a battle, which I think was accurate for the return job in camp. But one of the reasons we highlighted was saying, hey, this guy's 34. And I believe he'd been listed as 34, or at least with that particular birth year for his entire CFL career on their website. And he politely informed the Riders, I'm 33. My age has been wrong forever on the league's website. So that's just one example. I'm sure most of these ages are correct, but yeah, I think we could take some of the ages with a grain of salt because I was positive. I'm like, I looked it up. He's 22, but for right now, he is a mystery box that is both simultaneously 22 and 23, and we
He's
will
young.
hope to fact check at some point.
He's young. We can say that with certainty. He's a young up and comer. I think he showed that. Elsewhere on the roster, the guy who made the biggest impression in my mind was Calgary defensive tackle Elijah Hills. I know that there is, a battle for a number of spots along that Calgary defensive line. He wasn't the guy who was penciled in as the favorite to start, but he was certainly the one who flashed the most. I believe it was him, although it wasn't entirely clear with the numbers, who laid the hit on Cone to force that interception. He had another sack later in the game. I thought he consistently generated pressure when he was out there on the field. So Elijah Hill is now a guy that I'm going to be watching closely in preseason game number 2 to see if he can sort of seize a hold of that vacant defensive tackle spot in Calgary.
Hill or Hills? It's Hills, isn't it?
Sorry. Yes, it's Hills.
Hills. Okay. Just make sure we're on our P's and Q's here. John Hodge. Jack Cone looks like Trevor Harris.
I thought he did at the start of the
held
game.
on to the football so long that the season's changed. Trevor Harris gets rid of the football as fast as the seasons change on the prairies.
I thought that early on in the game, when I suspect the Riders were working off scripted plays, Cone got rid of the ball really quickly, and that benefited the Riders. And I would agree that as he played more and more, he started to hold on to the ball for too long. I also thought his offensive line let him down at times, but this is one of the challenges of these preseason games is the Stampeders are at home. They're going, okay, well, we're not going to bring a bunch of our vets on the road, so let's play them now. So Jack Cone early on in this game was playing alongside a bunch of backups and rookies, but he's playing against starters, right? And then as the game goes on, which I think makes a higher level of challenge. Whereas when the game goes on, right, and for example, Brayden Schager is in, he's playing alongside rookies and backups, but he's now playing against rookies and backups. So it's, I don't think an apples to apples comp. I don't think it's apples to oranges, but I don't think it's a perfect comp, if that makes sense. Looking at the defense at which Cone was trying to throw the ball versus Schager was trying to throw the ball.
It's not perfect, but let's note there's 3 starters, at least according to the depth chart for the Riders, that played snaps in that game. Peyton Collins, Zach Fry, and Jacob Brammer. So it wasn't like all rookies and backups. I don't think Darius Bell did particularly well in his first action, so I think your point is valid there. It's not perfect, but when I look at Jack Cone, I think that interception was caused because he hung on to the football too long. There was another sack that was caused because he hung onto the football too long. There was another pressure, I think, where he hung onto the football too long. Conversely, and yes, it's not a perfect comparison, when you look at Brayden Schager, he was getting the football out in rhythm. You saw those second-level intermediate throws. Honestly, those couple throws to Sexton look to more like me, similar to what Trevor Harris does. Those are great seam throws. Those are throws you need to be able to make in the Canadian Football League on the Canadian field. And then he was getting out of the pocket when needed. It wasn't like he was just scrambling like a chicken with his head cut off. So I thought if we're just looking at the quarterback who's in the pocket, how they're going through the reads, delivering the football, and then escaping the pocket when forced, I thought Schager looked much better. Your point is well taken. It's not perfect, but honestly, I thought Jack Cohen was very meh. Like this guy, if you took the names and numbers off the jerseys and you didn't know any difference, and you said, which player has been in the CFL for over 2 years now, and which player just got here last fall, who would you say?
It's a good question. I would probably take Schager as the experienced one and Cohen as the younger one. Yeah, I probably would.
Say Schager.
I said Schager. Schager?
You
Schager?
said probably. Like, that's a no-doubter to me.
Well, fair enough.
JC.
I would also say Schager. I think what this is going to come down to is in preseason game number 2, you've got to flip these two guys, right? You've got to give Schager the reps with the unit that Cohen was working with in this game and give Cohen the later game reps and see if in those same situations they perform similarly to the other guy, right? Because I think you made the point in our group chat yesterday, Dunk, which I thought was very salient, that this goes two ways. Schager may have been playing against lesser players late in the preseason game, but he also may have had lesser players in his huddle, guys who aren't well suited to make the team or aren't well positioned to do so. Now, if you put him with guys who are vying for actual roles and starters, does he look even better? I think that's entirely possible as well.
And we're talking about the Riders quarterback situation a lot, rightfully so. I think you guys broke down the Stamps situation there, pretty well. Vernon Adams Jr., we should highlight coming off that contract extension through 2028. Shout out Jeff in the comments. I see you, bro. Just go outside, breathe, and enjoy the summer weather, okay?
Touch some
we
grass.
mentioned his extension. Touch some grass, calm down. I would love if you got after us like that in person, because everybody seems to get so hopped up in the comments and over email. And then we see people in person, they're like, these guys aren't so bad, okay? We're not out to get the Calgary Stampeders. We call it how we see it. So VA, fresh off the contract extension, looked sharp, had that touchdown pass climbing up in the pocket to Jalen Philpott, who, if he stays healthy, I think Jalen Philpott could have a big year, just like his brother Tyson Philpott out there in Montreal. So I felt like Vernon Adams Jr. looked really good. That's what you want to see if you're Dave Dickinson. Yes, you got to get some questions answered in terms of who is behind him. But, I mean, even to that point again, like you guys noted, Love's been around professional football for a long time. Woldridge, I thought, looked fairly comfortable in there. Again, probably not going against the same level of competition. But also, like, let's recognize this for the guys that are in there at the end of the game, whether it's quarterback or any other position. You probably have not taken many practice reps with those players, even in training camp, right? Like the majority of reps, at least at quarterback, are going to go to Trevor Harris in this instance and Vernon Adams Jr., right? Then you go to the number twos. At this point, it's Jack Cohen leading the way in Saskatchewan, Josh Love in Calgary. So Brayden Schager probably hasn't had even many training camp reps with the guys he was on the field with. He probably barely knows Shamar McBean's name, who was just drafted after he was just drafted in the CFL draft recently. Like, these guys are just getting to know each other. So that's why I felt like it stood out so much that Schager was really good. I do think we should talk about, some of the defensive players. JC, that was smart to mention Hills. From Saskatchewan's perspective, everybody's focused on this defensive end competition. Who's going to step up and start there or provide rotational pass rush depth? I thought Chico Bennett Jr. was solid, if unspectacular. He had a sack in that game. Jalen Pate's a really interesting one. Corey Mace thinks that he has the ability to move inside and out at around 270 pounds. So that's a name certainly to keep an eye on. And then I thought Desmond Evans and those flashy cleats that he wore stuck out in a good way, but then he couldn't finish. He got to the quarterback 2 times right there, couldn't finish. So when you're evaluating him in the second preseason game, can he finish? That's the main question mark, I think, there. And then The other spot for Saskatchewan, that weak side linebacker position, Josh Woods, based on his contract, I think is the clubhouse leader there to start the season at weak side linebacker. But Aubrey Miller Jr. is a guy the Riders really like too. So there's some American depth there as they undergo a possible ratio changes at the position, because there has been some talk about Nick Weeb potentially playing there and possibly even Ryder Varga when he gets healthy. So some intriguing ratio options for Saskatchewan.
And I thought Malcolm Bell, their first round pick, did well at the corner spot as well, flashed a couple of times. Now, admittedly, preseason defenses are a little bit more simplistic. They tend to play a little bit more man than you'll see in the regular season, which fits Bell's skill set more because, you're essentially trying to evaluate, can these guys cover? Do they do the fundamentals rather than trying to confuse the offense? But Bell, I thought, looked as advertised in his first action for the green and white.
Hamilton Tiger Cats head coach Scott Milanovich told the media he wasn't sure his team was making the right cuts, given that 2 of the players the club let go had participated in only 2 practices. The CBA allows teams to open rookie camp with 100 players plus non-counters, but requires the roster to be trimmed to 85 by the start of training camp and 75 a few days later. Again, not including non-counters. JC, you seem to agree with Milanovich that the timeline is too tight. How would you change it?
It is far too tight. The reality is these players, and it's up to 25 per team because of these cuts, aren't getting a serious look at a full evaluation because, believe it or not, gentlemen, that final cut down date is the first day that you're allowed to put pads on in training camp. So at best, you are getting 1 padded practice as a football player to prove that you can adapt to an entirely new game that you've never seen before and compete with elite athletes. That's just not fair to these guys who are coming up here, who aren't getting paid, who are putting their bodies on the line. Now, would I like to see no cuts throughout training camp and carry everybody through both preseason games? I think that would be interesting. Certainly, that gives the most time for evaluation. I don't think you have to go that far. What I would like to see at the bare minimum here is these guys getting at least that full first week of training camp, not rookie camp and that first full week, multiple padded practices. Typically teams have that inter-squad scrimmage at the end of that first week. Let them have some game reps in there and then make some cut down decisions. That would be the best formula if you want to balance the cost and the logistical challenges of having so many players with actually giving these guys a look. But it should be noted here, this is not a CFL issue. This is not the league office or the teams saying we don't want to keep these guys around. In fact, I've had people from across the league reach out to me since this article saying, you're spot on. This is a major problem. We would like to see this change. The reality is it's the CFLPA in the collective bargaining agreement that enforces these cut down dates. And it's really to protect the jobs of veteran players who are their voting members. And they're willing to put rookies who are not yet voting members for them in a difficult position in order to protect the veterans. Frankly, to me, that's not fair to these guys. And if you're the PA, the union that's supposed to be protecting all players, I don't think it's fair to advantage the veterans over the rookies because ultimately it's a 1-for-1 equation. If a veteran gets cut and a rookie wins the job, well, he just became a voting member for you too. I think they're looking at this the wrong way, and it's unfair to these players who are trying to get up here, test the waters, and eventually reach their dreams.
A number of the veterans are already at an advantage due to what they're being paid in their signing bonuses. So, JC, I think an even balance for both sides. And to be fair, guys, we do bang on the CFL and the league office a lot. So this is a players association issue. I think for it to be at least even, it needs to be at minimum that those guys get the opportunity to get into a scrimmage with their own team, let alone the possibility to get into a preseason game. It would be difficult because teams probably aren't going to want to take 100 players on the road. So in an ideal scenario, if the teams had the financially ability to do it, I think to get the best evaluation, you have them for, essentially that entire month where there can be a body of work there with at least multiple padded practices, a scrimmage, and perhaps get in a home preseason game, let's call it. I realize that that might not be a possibility, but when you talk to some people across the league, some teams who have rookie camps will point out and say, well, we can't really make a great evaluation here with guys running around in shorts and jerseys and helmets on. And they point at Montreal and Edmonton and say, that might be a better way to do it, a better use of the resources when you're talking about what it takes to even just put on a rookie camp. So instead of having a rookie camp, have the rookies in there with the veterans for longer. I think that would be most beneficial for everybody, right? Because then the rookies can see how the veterans go about their business, can ask questions, not like the veterans have to help them, but it seems like a number of them would at least be open to it. So I think this needs to be figured out, potentially even for 2027, because if as a league, we truly want the best talent on the football field, which means ultimately the best product, which can ideally help your revenue, then this needs to be changed. Like, it's honestly ridiculous that after rookie camp, there's a bunch of cuts made. How are you supposed to understand if these guys have picked up the Canadian game after 3 days, right? And then you make another cut, as JC alluded to, after one padded practice? And credit to Scott Milanovic, too. He deserves, I think, some flowers for being honest in his answer, and he's shown that, at least in my experience with him. If you ask him a smart, precise question, he's going to give you a nuanced answer. And for him to come out here and say, yeah, we might be making the wrong choice because of the way it's set up, I think is great. It's honesty, and it's only going to help the discussion going forward to ultimately get the best product on the field.
I think that the article is smart, and I think that you guys are both making excellent points. I don't, however, want to go back to a world where it's like the old school, where you've got padded practices for like 20 days in a row, and the rookies are beating themselves to a pulp, often so that the veterans can
You're
just
only allowed
get
12
extra
anyway
reps.
under
Sorry?
the current CBA.
Say that again?
You're only allowed 12 under the current CBA anyway.
I understand this. I'm just trying to illustrate my point, because I do believe there are times where teams are going, okay, it's only day 3 of camp, but it's evident that this particular player is not making the team, right? And it's not anybody's best interest, including the player, for them to stick around for weeks and weeks and, again, continue to abuse their body and not get paid. By the way, you talk about the CFLPA looking after themselves and not the rookies. The rookies do not get paid for training camp. The veterans do. It's not like crazy money, but the vets get paid on a weekly basis. The rookies do not. So these guys, I think they deserve more time, and I think that the cut downs are too quick. But I can understand like why they were put in this way, and that's partly to protect guys who would otherwise, again, get beaten to a pulp and put themselves out there, because you're not going to make the team as a rookie unless you're giving 100%. And you're willing to put your body on the line and stick your nose in there and do literally every single thing the coaching staff is asking of you. You have to compete at 100%. You can't go 80, you can't go 90% to protect yourself. It's 100%. So I can see why the pendulum swung this far, but I agree with both of you that the pendulum needs to swing back at least a little bit the other way, because in that instance I just talked about of, well, this guy's not going to make the team, it's only day 3. We do see this happen already, where even though teams don't have to make cuts, they'll cut that particular player so that they can bring in someone else, right? They can free up the roster spot. So it's not even like you bring in 100 guys and now you're stuck with those exactly 100 guys through training camp. You could potentially push back the mandatory cut dates, and still, I don't think you should have 100 guys there for the end of training camp. But if you could even push back the 85, as JC said, till after the first week, and then maybe do 75 between the 2 preseason games, that I think would have a better balance of giving these rookies a shot and actually making it worth it to come up and try out for these teams and put their bodies on the line, while also not taking advantage of them and potentially having them get injured trying to win a job that, again, pretty early on in camp, the team was like, yeah, this guy's not making it. And we're going to keep him around because he's somebody who, again, our team can go up against and he can provide, he can be a camp body. Like, that's literally a term. This is a camp body who can help us run our practices, even though we all know, he doesn't know, but we know that he's not making the team. So I would like to see the pendulum swing back, not dramatically the other way, but I would like to see it swing somewhat back the other way.
You raise a really important point there, Hodge, in that this is also about making it attractive for players to come up to the CFL. Now, I think you're always going to have players who want to take that opportunity, and there's not that many people involved in high-level football who think about the possibility of them getting cut. I think almost every player in training camp comes in with this vision of them making the team and becoming the star player and having a long career. That's just the confidence that professional athletes have. But the reality is there's a shift happening in football, right? You've got the UFL that's competing for talent right now, however long that lasts, but also the dynamics are shifting with these college players getting paid. And guys are not going to be as desperate to come up and get a paycheck because they've already earned money, many of them in college. So when you lay out the hard facts of, hey, how would you like to come up to Canada? And again, the season moving up, it might be cold in Saskatoon, right? How would you like to go and practice in the snow in Saskatoon, make $0 and get cut after 3 practices? Does that sound like fun after you've just made $100,000 in your last year of college, or however much these guys end up getting paid? It's not an attractive proposal. And if you're the CFL and you want to compete with other leagues and you want to keep the caliber of talent in this league at the highest level possible, you have to make coming here attractive. And in my mind, that means a legitimate opportunity for players. And I think you have to seriously look into some sort of compensation for rookies in training camp. Doesn't have to be a lot. The vets don't get paid a lot either. But right now, they get $0 unless you make the team, after which point, if you're still on the roster 48 hours later, you get $300 for your troubles. That's just not good enough in my mind right now. These guys deserve more than that.
The Canadian Football League has officially ratified several rule changes for 2026, including tie games being eliminated. No more ties, boys. There's only a few anyways, but whatever. Instead of ending games after 2 overtime mini games, ties will now be broken with a series of alternating 2-point converts. Other changes include the clock remaining unchanged for the final 3 minutes in both halves, thank goodness, tidying up the directive to quicken the command center, quickening end-of-game kneel-downs, and putting the ball at the 40-yard line if teams kick through the back of the end zone or the ball strikes the goalpost and no points are scored. Hodge, how do you feel about these tweaks?
I really like them all. And I'm not just saying that to say that. I don't do that. I genuinely like all these changes. And I think this even goes back to the previously ratified changes that are like the Rouge changing and the benches. I think I'm on board with literally every change that the CFL has made for 2026. I still do not like the changes for 2027, including the playoff format and the field dimensions and the upright. I don't like any of that. But I really like all these changes for 2026. I think these are smart changes. I think these are good changes. The ties just suck. And there were no ties in 2025, but there were 2 in 2024. And I'm sorry, it leaves such a bad taste in your mouth when ties happen. Ties also make it horrible to put together playoff scenarios, right? We've all seen the playoff scenarios where it's like, well, if this team wins, they're in. But if they lose, they're out. But if they tie, well, here's 17 different things that can happen, including what will happen if other games end in a tie, in which case this becomes a disaster. So I think this is a perfect solution. Let's get rid of ties. The league is going to have multiple mini games as much as are needed in order to figure out the winner. They will be played at the same end of the field. So wind will not be a factor. In other words, you're not going to have one team trying to score a convert into the wind and another team gets the win. So it's going to be fair. It's going to be equitable. I like all of that. I also really like the clock changing. I thought that was a good takeaway from the Sask Stampeders game. We didn't talk about it off the top of the show, but I liked the 35-second clock. I thought things moved quicker, and it wasn't the focus of the press release, nor was it the focus of our article on these changes. But I think this is a big deal. This is from our article. When the new 35-second play clock is in effect, replay officials are to, quote, avoid slowing the game down unless a critical ruling is in question, close quote. When the 20-second play clock is in effect, in other words, the last 3 minutes of both halves, the replay center is to, quote, support on-field officials during natural breaks in play, such as after a penalty has been called on the field or in automatic review situations, close quote. So in other words, what the league is saying is, okay, outside of the last 3 minutes, if there's an egregious, like really big mistake on the field, please replay center, fix it. We don't want big embarrassing mistakes. But short of that, keep your hands in your pockets. Just enjoy the game. Do not disrupt it. Do not have a 28 million minute delay so that we can move the football an inch after it's been spotted. Like no, please don't do that. We want pace of play. We want it to be slick. We want it to be quick. We want it to be fun and energetic and exciting. But late in the game or late in both halves, please, if there is a moderate mistake and there's a natural break, because the pace of play will be slower in the last 3 minutes of both halves, please pop in and fix it, which I think is the best of both worlds, right? This is something we've been talking about for years, is how can the, as it was previously known, command center, now replay center, properly step in, right? We hear complaints all the times from fans when there's a missed call, but then when the replay center comes in and fixes it, all the complaints are like, now the game's too slow, right? It's very hard to please everybody. Here, I think you're having your cake and eating it too. You're saying, okay, here's exactly when the replay center is going to keep their hands in their pockets and let the pace of play go quickly. But when the game's on the line late, they will slow it down to fix stuff because that's really important. And I think that's brilliant. Other little changes that were announced: turnover on downs rulings will result in automatic review from the replay center. I think that makes sense. Turnovers are already generally reviewed by the replay center. Adding turnovers on downs, I think, makes sense. If a kick goes out of bounds to the end zone with no point awarded, this is part of the Rouge change, which again, I like for 2026. The ball will be scrimmaged at the 40-yard line. That, I think, is a disincentive to try long field goals. Teams do not want to give their opponents possession on the 40-yard line. And then there's some stuff about ineligible numbers that honestly I don't think any fans will even notice or care about. But regardless, I think that all the changes for 2026 get a big thumbs up from me. There's not a single one I don't like, and some of them I really love. So kudos to the league. Again, they've come through, and some of it's come from us, but they've received a ton of criticism for these changes. And everything for 2026, now that it's all finalized, all set, all ready to go, it gets a big thumbs up from me.
I like the new overtime rules where we can't have ties and there's going to be these alternating mini games. It's very similar to the college format, which I think has led to some very exciting finishes in the NCAA. Some of the best games I've ever watched have come down to these 2-point convert shootouts and can be absolutely electric. So I'm excited to see that eventually come to pass in a CFL game. Now, I do believe that there is a mechanism for a tie in a very rare circumstances, if I understand the CFL weather policy, right? If a game is called due to an excessive lightning delay and the teams are tied at that point and they don't play again, I believe in that circumstance there could still be a tie on the record. But you're talking about the rarest of all circumstances, something that has never happened before in CFL history. In all likelihood, we are not going to see a tie again, and I think that's a positive. The only other rule change here that sort of hurts my heart just a little bit is the kneel down rule. Not because I genuinely think anything's going to happen. For player safety reasons, teams are generally advised to not contest those kneel down situations. But back in the day, I won a high school championship on a fumbled kneel down. So I hate the idea that there's not going to be an extra snap at the end of the game where some chaos could occur and some quarterback stubs his finger on the snap and the ball goes loose and somebody wins in an unlikely scenario. I always hold out some little hope that there's something at the end of games like that, but I understand the logic behind that change, and I think what the CFL has done here overall is very smart.
Sounds like 2 thumbs up from you fellas for the tweaks, I'll call them. And imagine that actually going through a process where all the stakeholders have a voice and you come to a majority decision that everyone is happy with. I think these 2026 changes
Unprecedented.
are great. Yeah, I mean, what a wild idea. So you have the play clock quickening up the pace. I did notice that during the first preseason game, Saskatchewan at Calgary, but it didn't seem too fast. And then all the other tweaks have, as you guys have laid out, I think are really smart. And again, I wish that that was the same process for 2027, especially the playoffs and the structural changes that were announced prior to them. If you would have talked to, the general managers and the head coaches and everybody was on board or at least got to voice their ideas, I think that would have been received by the public much better because you would not have had Nathan Rourke out here speaking out against them a bunch of times. You wouldn't have had Mike O'Shea biting his tongue. I think in 2026, everybody can understand these changes make sense, right? The game clock, 35 seconds being uniform outside the 3 minutes makes a lot of sense, as do a bunch of the other changes. I think people might have a little bit of an issue with the 2-point mini games deciding a game, but I mean, at some point, we got to figure out something to get a winner here. And I think it's similar to soccer with their shootout in this way, this 2-point convert idea. So I give the CFL a thumbs up for how they went about the process of making these changes for 2026. And I really do hope that there is more discussion about the 2027 changes with the key stakeholders. And there's still that pushback that's at least heard, and perhaps possible tweaks are made to those structural changes. It doesn't seem like the playoff one is going to change. I still can't fathom 8 out of 9 making the playoffs, but hey, feel free to prove me wrong with a big new TV deal, Stuart Johnston.
Well, and I think one of the downsides that's come from, or one of the negatives that's come from the changes that the CFL, all the changes that they've laid out over the last just over kind of calendar year, is when the detractors, right, speak up, their critics will be like, oh, well, you just don't like this change because you're against all change, or you're just afraid of all change, or no, you're just unreasonable. You just want everything to stay the same. And in some cases, that's probably true. I personally, when it comes to the movement of the goalpost, when it comes to the shortening of the field, to me, these are not nominal changes. Like, these are big changes to the game. And I think the kneel down that has been changed, or that JC touched on, is an example of, if you don't like this, okay, at least in my book, you're a bit of a traditionalist who's stuck in the mud. Like, you're a bit of a stick in the mud. Like, if it's first
What
down,
are you trying to say, Hodge?
and there's 40 seconds or fewer in the game, and the defense does not have a timeout, there is no reason to make the offense kneel down multiple times. It's a ceremonial thing. This is the same as baseball going, okay, we're not actually going to make you throw the ball wide on purpose 4 different times to Barry Bonds, which I'm dating my baseball fandom by throwing Barry Bonds as my example.
Aaron
You can
Judge.
just do it one time. You can just do it. We all know what you're doing. Let's speed up the game. Let's get it going. Let's
Dude,
get
they don't
like
even do
batter
that
to the
now.
Bucks.
They just say, we're walking them. It's not
Exactly.
even one pitch.
Even better. Just walk him. Just say, we're not pitching to this guy. Give him first base and get moving. So I always find it awkward at the end of the game when there's multiple kneel downs. Like, the home team takes the field and they're in, victory formation, and they snap the ball and the crowd roars. And there's like this awkward, like, shimming around, like, oh shoot, I guess we got to do that again. And the crowd kind of and some people, I think, understand what's happening. Some people don't. They're like, didn't we just win? What? And then they have to kind of cheer again when the second one happens, and it's awkward and it's weird, and everyone's kind of like, no, just have the game end on a kneel down. We don't need a second one. This, to me, is an example of a change that does not affect the game at all. And that anybody should get on board with. Again, some of the changes that I think some have improperly labeled as being, very insignificant or things that are unreasonable to get upset about, I think they are. But in this case, yes, to me, this is a nominal change. There is no reason for anybody to get upset about it. This is about preserving pace of play and getting teams off the field. Another element of this could be the TV world, right? When the game is done, the reason that networks cut away as quickly as they can is to preserve their game rating as people are tuning away. So this is also a way to kind of artificially, if you could shorten the broadcast by 20 seconds at the end, your ratings will theoretically be a tiny bit higher. So there's other reasons behind the scenes why I think this is happening, but I like it. I like all the changes. A+ from me. 2027, not so much, but 2026, I'm fully on board and I'm excited to see this not new version of the CFL, but slightly updated version. I think it's going to be good. Global BC reported that the BC Lions are renegotiating the team's lease at BC Place Stadium amidst threats the Vancouver Whitecaps could move to Las Vegas. Pavco, the crown corporation that operates BC Place and controls its major game day revenue sources, including naming rights, concert revenue, parking, concessions, and alcohol sales, which of course hinders the bottom lines of teams like the Lions and Whitecaps. How big of a deal is this for CFL fans?
I think it's definitely something to monitor if you care about the health of the BC Lions franchising. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm an expert on the Vancouver Whitecaps situation. I'm not. Or that I'm an expert on the BC Lions' current lease at BC Place. I have not seen that text. I have not combed through it. I don't know the specific details of their current deal. But if you're reading the tea leaves and you're looking at this situation with the Whitecaps and what Pavco and the province and the city and all these stakeholders are now doing to try and bend over backwards to keep the Vancouver Whitecaps in Vancouver, they're offering a pretty sweet deal. And they've offered a sweet deal in the past that's been rejected, and they're just going to keep upping the potential here on what they are offering the franchise to stay in BC Place. Well, if you've got another professional team, a locally owned team in that stadium, you can't offer them a dramatically worse deal. I don't necessarily think it has to be identical to what you offer the Whitecaps, but I think there has to be some leeway there in terms of also giving them similar terms. So if the Whitecaps are going to be able to make money off alcohol sales and concession sales and parking, while presumably that same sort of deal will be offered to the BC Lions, which will help the club's bottom line. I imagine one of the things that the Whitecaps want very much is to have the ability to sell naming rights to BC Place. And if they're granted that ability, could the BC Lions get a cut of that deal, which I would imagine will be in the multi-millions of dollars and certainly a sizable chunk of change, even if they were granted a smaller proportion of that. These are all factors that I think CFL fans have to be looking at for the Lions. And, Amar Doman has done a wonderful job as the owner of this franchise of reinvigorating interest and getting them more stable. I think they're trending in the right direction towards profitability, although I don't have any specific details on what their bottom line was last year. But if you get a sweeter deal at BC Place and you have these new revenue streams open up, I think that really pushes this franchise forward, and that's good for the CFL in general.
If you're a BC Place and you're offering a sweetheart deal to the Vancouver Whitecaps, and then you turn around and you don't give the same deal to the BC Lions, I just can't understand how you could be doing business like that, right? BC Place needs tenants in the building. And if the Vancouver Whitecaps leave, those are some key dates, and they've had some big crowds since Thomas Mueller has come there, especially, and the fact that they've been at the top of the Western Conference in Major League Soccer, not just last year, but even this year again. Like, they are a legitimate threat to win the MLS Cup. The same thing can be said for the BC Lions. Yes, it's only 10 home dates in an ideal season when you're not hosting the FIFA World Cup or FIFA World Cup games there at BC Place. You need those dates because the BC Lions have shown that they can draw attendance and pack that building there, especially when Amar Doman is putting on concerts. So I think that deal has to be the same, and the BC Lions have to be happy that this is happening because it's going to help them, as JC said, get to profitability. And BC Place needs to realize if these teams don't have the ability to be profitable, they are not going to play in your building because they won't exist.
I also think it's silly that there's no naming rights deal, right? Like you're leaving a lot of money on the table for no reason. Like the only reason to me not to have a naming rights deal for your building is if you can't elicit one. Like no one's willing to pay you. And I cannot imagine that in a city as big with as much money as Vancouver, that a world-class venue with two major tenants cannot elicit a name rights deal. To me, the only explanation for there not being a name rights deal, and I'm speculating obviously, but is that simply they don't want to do one, right? They just like having a simple name, BC Place Stadium, fine. But I'm sorry, leaving that kind of money on the table does not make sense to me. If you're also going to simultaneously say, "Oh, but we need," hold on, yeah, we're not gonna do naming rights, but we need all the parking and the concessions and the booze. That's all we're asking. Like, I'm sorry, can we not be a little bit more equitable here in sharing some of that revenue and then creating a new revenue stream with naming the building, right? It's not complicated. You can maximize your revenue. And also, I really I was actually getting quite angry when I was seeing some of the reporting, which I don't think there was a real possibility that the Whitecaps were going to build their own stadium, but there was chatter about that. I'm like, didn't we just spend as taxpayers like $150 million putting a new roof on this sucker? And you're telling me that you want a new building? Like, no, BC Place is awesome. Yeah, it's not brand new, but it's an amazing location. It's an excellent venue. It should be the home of Vancouver sports for the next 50 to 100 years. And if you want a new stadium, you can do one of two things. One, you can build it 100% with your own money. Or two, you can go fly a kite off the Pacific coast. Done.
I do think ultimately this will lead to a new stadium for the Whitecaps. Maybe not immediately, but in the long term. Like any new deal and lease for BC Place is sort of a stopgap because MLS wants them to have their own stadium because of some of the other revenue streams in terms of real estate and things like that. That is how the league makes money or how teams in the league have made money. But your point is well taken, Hodge, and part of the reason why there's not naming rights for BC Place is I don't think that's really part of Pavco's mandate, right? They're a crown corporation. They're supposed to, offset what the taxpayers are putting into it, but they don't make a ton of money off of the leases from these teams. I believe the figure that was reported for at least off the Whitecaps leases, they make about 1.5 million in terms of the revenue that they bring in from concession sales and parking and all of those other extraneous factors. And they were willing to go down to net zero and essentially give that to the Whitecaps to facilitate them staying there in February. And the Whitecaps rejected that deal. Now we have multiple levels of government involved, the city, the province. There are conflicting reports about whether the federal government is involved as well as a number of local First Nations groups and business partners, and they're offering even more. And when you talk about it from a government perspective, let's not forget BC Lions fans are your constituents, right? So if you're going to go out there as a BC MLA and pound the table to fork over a bunch of money to the Vancouver Whitecaps, and then you're going to give a bad deal to the BC Lions, you're going to feel that from your constituents, either, through them voicing their complaints via email or letter or showing up to your office, or in the election when they vote you out of office. This is a very simple issue where you can make everybody happy by keeping every team in the city, giving popular sports franchises a good deal, and there's not going to be a lot of pushback I don't think, from the general public to just allow them to make money in the building. It's not as if you're pumping hundreds of millions of dollars to build a new venue, which I think would be generally unpopular with the public. The Montreal Alouettes signed Canadian quarterback Arnaud Desjardins on Monday. Head coach Jason Moss said the plan is to give him a legit shot. Do you believe him, Dunk?
I really want to believe him. And if you look at the Alouettes roster, I think it tells us we might be able to believe him because if I'm right, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, Davis Alexander 1, Dustin Crum 2, Anthony Brown, who they're evaluating his injury, could be the 3. Arnaud Desjardins, is now there. So they only have 4 quarterbacks with them in training camp.
They signed another one when they brought in Desjardins, I believe.
There
they
we go.
brought
So
in
it could
2
be 5.
simultaneously.
So they have to sort out some positions there. But the fact that we were talking about the cuts earlier in terms of the teams having the power to cut a player essentially at any time, well, they decided to do that with EJ Perry and Dresser Wynn. They didn't really feel like they had, I think what Moss said or was quoted as saying as what they were looking for at the quarterback position, didn't go into details there. So if there are 4 or 5 quarterbacks there and Arnaud Desjardins is one of them, if Jason Moss is to be taken at his word, then potentially he does get a legit shot. And I don't understand, to Moss's point too, how Desjardins didn't get into a CFL training camp last year. Like, we're talking about not a quarterback who was a game manager with Laval winning 2 Vanier Cups. We're talking about a quarterback who led Laval at 6'4", 215 pounds to 2 Vanier Cup victories, in 2022 and 2024. Like, this is a really good natural passer who has the size to play professional football. And I credit Moss for being honest, like we did Milanovic earlier, because he said that the Alouettes selected Jonathan Senecal in the draft and gave him a shot, possibly over Desjardins, but that he really liked Desjardins and thought he would have gotten an opportunity elsewhere. Now it's worked out this way that Senecal has moved on from football and Desjardins is getting the opportunity. Would have been more ideal if he was in there at the start of training camp, but that's not how professional opportunities work. They don't come along when you want them to. You have to take advantage of it. And I also thought that it was noteworthy, and credit to our guy Pablo Herrera Barguera for getting this detail. Arnaud Desjardins got the call with Danny Machocha offering a contract to sign with the Montreal Alouettes on Friday afternoon after he was leaving work at Davies, which is a law firm in Montreal. Like, this guy's on his way to be a lawyer, yet here he is dropping that, as lucrative as it can be, for him to go to the Alouettes training camp. Now, credit to Davies for allowing him to do so, and he was asked about whether or not he would accept a practice roster spot and essentially said, hey, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But this guy clearly wants to play football. And I think that if you just look at him from what he's done at Laval, that he should get a legit shot. And that was Jason Moss's actual words. He said, that's the plan. If he picks up everything that we've asked him to pick up, he'll get a legit shot. And Moss even went so far as to say he'll play in games. So this seems like not just a short-term training camp arm kind of guy. This seems like a guy that they're like, no, we want to bring him in. If he can pick up the playbook and learn it, we'll actually give him reps in preseason games. So we will know if Moss is telling the truth or not if Desjardins actually gets to play in the preseason with the Alouettes.
I thought that was well articulated and incorrect. I thought everything you need to know about the situation is the fact that Arnaud Desjardins was not in a training camp last year, which means that he is currently a non-counter. A non-counter is a player who does not count against your roster cap. If the Montreal Alouettes thought Arnaud Desjardins could make their team and they were interested in him as a quarterback, they could have signed him in December and brought him into camp as a non-counter. I believe the reason they've signed him is because they have their 3 quarterbacks, Davis Alexander, obviously Dustin Crum, and then the rookie, Anthony Brown Jr., who they like but is hurt, and they're going, oh, shoot, we don't want to play Davis Alexander for like quarters at a time in the preseason. That would put him at risk of injury. We also don't really want to play Dustin Crum for quarters at a time in training camp. In preseason, he could get hurt. And right now there's nobody else to do it. And if we sign any other quarterback, we have to cut somebody to do it. And they said, well, we're getting Arnaud Desjardins. He doesn't count. And they did that. Now, as JC pointed out, they did also bring back James Morgan, who was with the team last year, former NFLer, started a couple games. Results were shaky at best. So maybe I'm reading too much into the non-counter thing, but
it's a good point, Hodge. It's a really good point.
Well, you could have had this guy the whole time for free. He's a rookie. He doesn't get paid, and he doesn't count on the roster. And you didn't have him there until you went, oh, wow, we brought in 3 guys. 2 were terrible, and 1 is hurt. Like, this is them pressing the panic button and bringing in a local guy. Now, should Arnaud Desjardins have been in a camp last year? Yes. Does he deserve this opportunity? Yes. Is it great that he's pursuing law? I think he's going to be a successful lawyer. He's smart. He's a leader. He works hard, all those things. And I don't fault him for taking this opportunity because he might only be with the Alouettes for like literally a week or 2, right? That's cool if he wants to be able to do that and balance that on top of everything he's doing. I just believe in watching more what teams are doing than what they're saying. And as much as they're saying the right things in the Machocha statement, in the Jason Maas quote, yeah, he's going to get a chance, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, actions speak louder than words. This guy has been out of football for 6 months, and any day in those 6 months, you could have picked up the phone and said, hey, we're signing you to the rookie minimum. You're going to come to camp as a non-counter. You in? And you would have said, oui, monsieur, s'il vous plaît, with a much better accent than I can do, right? And they did not do that. Good. So I don't believe this at all is the short answer. I'm happy it's happening for the sake of Desjardins. I think it's a good story, but I think this is a farce. I really do.
I'm 100% in alignment with Hodge here. I do not believe that this opportunity is going to be legitimate. I mean, the preseason reps will be telling, but I believe the non-counter factor is huge because you were able to bring in an additional arm without having to cut anybody else. I think that matters here, and that he is simply a placeholder until Anthony Brown gets back to full health. And I will take my cynicism one step further than Hodge and remind our audience, or I guess I will ask you guys, where are the Montreal Alouettes currently having training camp?
Quebec City.
Yes, at Pats at Laval. Do you think that bringing in a Laval quarterback might spark a little bit more interest in the city and maybe get some people into the stands at training camp and maybe even sell a few custom Montreal Alouettes jerseys with Desjardins on the back to those fans who come out to watch him in training camp in football mad Quebec City, where they love the Rouge et Or? I think that's entirely possible. To me, I think this is a cynical move. I think it's a publicity stunt, and that's unfortunate because Desjardins is a really good quarterback. I thought he deserved more coming out of the draft. He's incredibly accurate, but I don't believe he's going to be given a legitimate opportunity with the Alouettes.
I'll try to swing this back the other way to provide some balance. I thought you guys are spot on with what you said, but I think it's different being a non-counter as a quarterback because there are only so many reps to go around, and Jason Maas isn't one to waste time with quarterbacks. So I do think what JC elevated there is likely the most true of anything else, that Desjardins played there and it could help draw some interest. That's certainly part of this, whether the Alouettes say it or not. But I also think on the other side, you don't want to be wasting time with quarterbacks. You don't want to be wasting those reps. And yes, perhaps part of it is because Brown is injured and you don't want to go through having Alexander and Crum play more in the preseason as you guys laid out to begin with. But I just don't think that you want to waste bringing in a quarterback. There are a bunch of PR reasons that line up here. And that's why I said off the top, I hope that Jason Maas and Danny Machocha are being truthful. But as Hodge said, actions over words.
JC, you spoke to New BC Lions defensive tackle Casey Sayles, who described his release from the Hamilton Tiger Cats as, quote, unprofessional and embarrassing, close quote. What happened between the two sides?
It seems like it was a really unfortunate mess up on the Ticats side. Sayles was informed of his release back in January by a team employee, not a coaching staff member, not a front office member, a team employee with whom he had a good relationship, who believed that he already had been informed of his release and I guess was reaching out to say, hey, it sucks that you've been cut. You know, you always have a friend here. He then had to reach out to the front office himself and ask if he had been released. He was told that he hadn't been, not to worry, this isn't true. And then 3 hours later, Scott Milanovich calls him and released him. He did apologize at the time for how things were handled, but at that point, the emotional roller coaster that he and his wife had gone through took a toll. And I think speaking with Sayles, that was my biggest takeaway. This is a guy who was not eager to share this story. I want to make that very clear. You speak to guys sometimes, and we have a dozen stories throughout the offseason of player X leaves team Y and disagreed with that decision. This is not the case here. Sayles understood the financial dynamics. He didn't speak about them making the wrong decision or anything like that. And when I requested an interview with him back in February, he declined that because he was not ready to speak about this topic. But when I spoke to him at training camp, he was clearly pained by this still. He was very careful with his words. He didn't name any names, but it was important to him from his perspective that he voiced this because he doesn't want it to happen to any other players in the future, because that's just a terrible way to have terrible news delivered when you're being strung back and forth like a human yo-yo.
You just can't be treating players like that. And JC, you noted in your article that Hamilton has consistently ranked at the top of the CFL player report cards. So that should be noted. But this is the kind of stuff that behind the scenes gets talked about by players and agents and gets around, right? Like, I do hope that the Hamilton Tiger Cats endeavor to do better. I think that will likely be the case. But, I hear stories similar to this too often in this league behind the scenes. And it hurts your reputation when you're trying to recruit, American players up here, or it hurts your reputation in general as a franchise, in this instance, for Hamilton, when players hear about this kind of stuff, that you can't just have a professional way to go about this. So somebody can't call you and deliver the news. And, Scott Milanovich talked about his approach to releasing players, that he doesn't beat around the bush. He likes to rip the Band-Aid off, was his exact words. So for this to happen like this, I don't think was necessarily intended by Hamilton, but there's a lot of this that needs to be cleaned up around the league. Just have some clear, consistent, concise communication. That's all it would really take. And then if the players have questions, like Milanovich talked about as well, he's happy to answer them in terms of why the decision was made. It's clear Sayles understands, as JC said, the financial implications to this move really were the main driving factors. But I think it's just like, be better, be clear, be concise with your communication, and don't let players find out they've been released by somebody who's not even in the football front office.
Couldn't agree more, and great job with the story, JC. And credit to Casey Sayles for telling the story. Like, the Tiger Cats declined comment on the story, so they could have rebutted it if Casey was off on any details or was blowing smoke or had misunderstood something. And I think when players speak out about this stuff, it actually forces teams to be more accountable, right? When these things do not hit the media, they get swept under the rug, and the potential, I think, is there for the same mistakes to happen again. So I think the fact that it got out means that we're not going to see this mistake from the Tiger Cats anytime soon. And I'm sure there's other teams in the league who are seeing this story and going, okay, let's make sure we do another review of our policy for exactly how we conduct this business, lest we get egg on our face in the future as well.
It wasn't acrimonious, and I think that should be noted, right? Like, Sayles talked about this, and JC, you can speak to it better, but in a professional way. He wasn't throwing shade or wanting to sling mud at the Ticats. I think he laid out the situation and why he felt disappointed in the franchise, in my opinion, in a professional way.
Totally.
I completely agree. It was, that was what stuck out to me about the interview. I'd been chasing this story, or at least Sayles' side of the release from Hamilton, for a while. And it was almost like a guy facing the music. He didn't want to talk about it, but he knew the question was coming sooner or later. The first thing he said when he saw me was, "Yeah, I knew it was either now or week 3, so let's get it over with." And we had the conversation. I thought he was very careful and thoughtful with his words. I gained a lot of respect for him in that moment. And let's be clear, from the Ticats side, like, mistakes happen. I think we can all understand a circumstance where, a staff member hears something, they're not fully informed, maybe they shouldn't have heard it, but they reach out to a player. I don't think that's necessarily the issue, even though that's a mistake and should be apologized for. It's when he then has to reach out to the front office and says, "Hey, is this true?" Like, you've got a very narrow window there, in my mind, to either say, "Yes, it's true, I'm sorry you had to find out this way," or, "Hey, let me call you back in 5 minutes. I got to talk to somebody above me in the food chain." But it can't be, "No, this is not true," and then 3 hours later, "Yes, it is true." And you have to wonder about the Ticats front office, as this is a team that doesn't have a general manager, right? And we have written stories about, okay, what is the chain of command in the Ticats front office right now, and how does that work? And they've said, well, this isn't an issue. It all goes through Orlando Steinauer, and maybe that's the case, and this doesn't indicate anything. But when you have a situation in which a front office member is saying one thing and then 3 hours later another decision is being communicated, you have to wonder if there's a communication error within that organization that currently does not have the common traditional structure that you see in football front offices.
Full credit to Casey Sayles for even doing the interview. He could have just ducked you, JC, right? He could have declined it. He could have said, "No, I don't want to talk about it." But he realizes that his salary is essentially paid by the fans. He's a public figure, a notable player. And he went about the interview, as you said, faced the music. I don't think it was bad by any means. It's not like he did anything wrong, but he talked about it in a very professional way. There have been players in many other sports. You just look at recently in the OHL, like, teams refusing to do interviews after wins. In the NHL, the Las Vegas Golden Knights just got fined a whole heck of a lot. I believe it was a second round NHL draft pick for not doing media after one of their victories. So let's just say, I think there are some other players, especially in the Canadian Football League, that could learn from Casey Sayles and his professionalism.
It's now time for JC's random neg lister, and we all watched that preseason game. We talked about it off the top. If you're the Calgary Stampeders, I don't think you're thrilled with your quarterback depth behind Vernon Adams Jr. right now. So I looked at their neg list and I said, is there any quarterbacks on there that could be signed right now? And there's 2. Tommy Mellott, the uber athletic former FCS quarterback who I've spoken about before in the random neg lister segment. He remains a free agent after an unsuccessful attempt to become a wide receiver with the Las Vegas Raiders. And the other one is quarterback Preston Stone out of Northwestern. He's 6'1", 219 pounds. He had his best seasons at SMU, Southern Methodist University, in 2023. He was a third-team all AAC selection and led that team to a 10-2 record. He threw 28 touchdowns and just 6 picks that season, The following year, he struggled, and he was benched, eventually transferred to Northwestern, had a bit of a down year. Last year, only 14 TDs and 12 interceptions, but he's got some gunslinger in him. He's not afraid to make the deep throws down the field and force it into tight windows. I think he could be an interesting guy if the Stampeders view their quarterback room as inadequate right now. Maybe Preston Stone is somebody they can bring in.
Hodge's heritage moment. On this day in 2009, the BC Lions signed Travis Lulay following brief stints with the Seattle Seahawks and New Orleans Saints. The quarterback did not excel during his first 2 seasons in the CFL, passing for 11 touchdowns and 13 interceptions, with some fans dubbing him Lullaby Lulay. I will never forget that. Twitter was in its infancy. CFL fans calling him Lullaby Lulay. Well, that all changed in 2011 when he won the league's Most Outstanding Player award after throwing for 4,800 yards, 32 touchdowns, and 11 picks, en route to a Grey Cup title. Lulay fought injuries through much of his career, but he remains one of the most popular passers in the history of the BC Lions. I don't think I've ever seen a career turn around like this, gentlemen. And I'll also say this. It's a good reminder, especially at this time of year, that just because somebody doesn't light it up in their first couple years, especially the quarterback position, doesn't mean they can't become a great player. Because Travis Lulay certainly became that over his tenure in BC.
He absolutely
That's why he can't be cutting guys after 3 or 5 days of training camp.
True.
JC, what were you going to say?
Just say he absolutely did. And for me, when I think of Travis Lulay, he's one of the biggest what ifs in my time watching the CFL. I won't say CFL history because obviously I've not been around very long. But what if Travis Lulay had never hurt his shoulder? Like, how good would he have been? Because when he was at his peak in that 2011 season, he was incredible. And I think we missed out on a lot of good football because of those injuries.
Well said. Let's get to the 3-minute drill. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers cut former Red Black starter defensive back Elijah McGee. Was that a surprise, Hodge?
It was, because he was running with the first team, which is a good reminder that sometimes running with the first team don't mean jack. Now with the Montreal Alouettes, Micah Awe seems out for blood following his release from the BC Lions. JC, how fired up is Awe to play his former team?
He seems to have a little edge to him. He's saying somebody out there has to pay. Now, I think he understands that, you know, he's had a nomadic career and there's a reason people release him, but he feels used. And I think if he makes the Alouettes roster, and that is not a guarantee to any extent right now, when they play BC, he is going to be coming for blood. The Toronto Argonauts cut incumbent starting running back Spencer Brown. Who the heck is going to start there now?
Your guess is as good as mine, but answer me this question. Why can't it be University of Guelph alum Isaiah Smith? Why not him?
They love him. They clearly love him.
TSN is broadcasting 2 preseason games in 2026. Is that an error, though?
I don't think it's an error. I think a lot of these games take place at the same time. Like Saturday, for instance, May 23rd, there's going to be 2 games that happen at the same time. And then the following preseason games are like all happening simultaneously. So it's impossible, as long as the games are scheduled like this, for TSN to show many of the games. And I think the fact that they're all available for free streaming on CFL Plus. And by the way, there have been times in the past where the streams have not worked very well. My stream for the Stamps Riders game was perfect. So I don't think it's, I don't think there's much reason for fans to complain about this. Preseason football is generally not great, and everybody can watch these games for free anyway. So I don't think it's a mistake. Former NFL and CFL quarterback Duck Hodges has married country music star Lainey Wilson. JC, do you know any of her music?
I thought I did. I always thought it was Heart Like a Truck, but turns out it's Heart Like a Duck.
Oh, that's terrible.
Canadian defensive lineman Emerson Joy has transferred from the University of Alberta to West Virginia Could he be the next Tavius Robinson and eventually be NFL bound?
I don't think we can go that far yet. You got to go to West Virginia with the Mountaineers and prove yourself, just like Tavius Robinson did. He's a good Guelph boy. Not only University of Guelph, but grew up in Guelph as well. So at least he's earned that opportunity. And we've seen, at least a handful of Canadian university student athletes going down to the NCAA over recent years, earning opportunities and at least getting a shot to play in the NFL. So Joey is trying to do exactly that. Veteran linebacker Jovan Santos Knox will miss the entire 2026 season after suffering an injury on the first day at Winnipeg Blue Bombers training camp. Is that a big loss?
It is. I mean, I think the biggest thing about Jovan Santos Knox is just how beloved and respected he is across the CFL. You talk to his former teammates, former coaches. He leaves an impact everywhere he's gone. On the field, I think the Bombers have a lot of options. Kyrie Wilson and Tony Jones are both back. I think Michael Griffiths is ready for a bigger role, and they've invested some draft capital into that spot with guys like Connor Shea and Jalen Smith going in a year two. But I think off the field, the intangibles, that's the worst part of this, is Santos Knox is just such a great guy, and he's not going to get the opportunity to play. And with this season-long injury at the age of 31, I'm sure the question he's asking himself is this it? Hopefully the answer is no, but we won't know until the future. Cody Fajardo told the media in Edmonton that the Elks have a Grey Cup caliber roster. Do you agree with him?
I certainly think that they're much improved on paper, but you can't be going and saying that you have a Grey Cup caliber roster and then a couple days later be saying that you're quite embarrassed by how your offense performed in the team scrimmage. That's not a good sign for the season right now. So I think there's still some things that have to be figured out in Edmonton as they integrate those new pieces. The Toronto Argonauts released former Heisman Trophy finalist quarterback Max Duggan, who has since been picked up by the Ottawa Redblacks. Did that surprise you?
It did not at all. He has the connection with Ryan Dinwiddie, and it gives Dinwiddie his top three quarterbacks having CFL experience: Drew Brown, Jake Mayer, and then now Max Duggan. Although it's not as much as Mayer and Brown, I thought it made a lot of sense. There were other teams in the mix for him, namely those Calgary Stampeders, but Duggan ultimately went to Ottawa. Isaiah Wooden, who was a star returner for the Hamilton Tiger Cats in 2025, has been waived by the Cleveland Browns. Could he make his way back to the Canadian Football League?
It's possible. He did, it's worth noting, work out for 5 NFL teams, so clearly there was significant interest this offseason. And I will also note that he is a true CFL free agent. His contract with the Tiger Cats was up in February, so this is not an instance where if he comes back to the CFL, he has to go to Steeltown under the terms of his previous contract. He is free to sign any deal with any team, which could potentially give him some leverage if he does decide to come back and pursue options. Former NFL draft pick Bradley Ine did not report to BC Lions training camp and has been placed on the suspended list. Did that catch the team off guard?
It did not. They were aware of this situation for quite some time and knew that Ane was not going to be back. And I think they're comfortable with what they have on the defensive line. Levi Bell, who alternated with Ane at the end of last season, is ready to take the next step. You've got Casey Sayles coming in, who's going to be a huge addition. And I thought they showed that they had some promising rookies as well in the one day of training camp that I was able to witness. I'm intrigued to see what TJ Burke, a recent signee, will do in the preseason because he flashed an awful lot in that Monday session.
For Justin Dunk and JC Abbott, I'm John Hodge. Thank you as always for listening to the 3DownNation podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter, subscribe to us on YouTube, and keep following along for all our news, insight, analysis, and goodies. Over the next few weeks, we've got 2 rounds of preseason games coming up shortly, 1 this weekend, and then 4 on Friday, May 29th. And there's going to be a whirlwind of cuts, so it's an exciting time of year. We're excited. We're ready to bring it. Please join us for the ride.